everyone. We have a wonderful panel of inspiring leaders in innovation and education. Our first question is open to everyone, and it is, across the world, we've made strides in education. But to this day, basic education for children in developing countries remains a challenge to governments and international organizations. How can education be improved in developing countries? Where's the future of education headed, and what role does MOOCs play in this? Would anyone like to start?
First of all, MOOCs are baby stuff. They're where TV first was when it first came out, when no one knew what to do with it. So all we're doing is recording videos. But this is the beginning of the revolution. If you start with India's Akash tablet, which is now down to $40, most likely it's going to be available in the United States in the next 3 or 4 months, $40 for 7-inch Android tablet. Prices are headed towards zero. Building apps on it, building interactive programs which can adjust education to the needs of the user, and teach people not only language but also culture, also mathematics, science. A whole range of different topics using technology. That's the way we're going to solve the problem. That there's no way that governments can hire enough teachers or build infrastructure fast enough to educate the hundreds of millions that need to be educated. We're going to have to use technology to do it. And cheap tablets are going to accelerate that whole process very, very rapidly. Not only in the developing world, but also in the developed world. There's poverty here in Silicon Valley. You go to Oakland or East Palo Alto, and you see the same poverty you see in parts of the developing world. So like this week, the weekend before last, we did a hackathon in Oakland. Level Playing Field Institute ran it with support from Silicon Valley Bank, in which we had 140 disadvantaged, mostly African American and Hispanic kids, building apps for tablets. So they walked out completely transformed. They realized that they too can share in it, and we gave them tablets when they left. We gave them Akash tablets from India with data access from AT&T, and they're now home building apps. So that's the way you can make a big impact.
Wonderful, thank you for the response. Would anyone else like to reply to that? Yes.
So Vivek, thanks. This brings up a really big issue, which is helping people learn how to author content. So for thousands of years, we have had social learning go on. And what's happened is we now have two new tools that make it possible for us to equip each other. And these new platforms are the kind of things that's going to make that possible. But one of the things that we're going to need to be able to do is to equip people to author new content for others. So it's going to be very exciting to see how that plays out.
There are a number of companies doing that right now. One of the spin-offs from Singularity University built an app that lets you build apps, because you'll find that when these tablets start becoming pervasive, they're going to be tens of thousands of different types of applications in each country for regular commerce and for other purposes. So apps for app building are now going to accelerate because the price is down this much. Right now, when we were doing these hackathons, we were looking for code building tools. We looked at what's it called, Code Academy and Treehouse and a bunch of others. They didn't work on tablets. So that has to move at light speed, so you can have apps being built for apps on tablets. But it'll happen in the next year or so.
So Vivek, can I ask you or anybody else, what gives you any hope, much less confidence, that all these apps that are going to get developed will actually, at the end of the day, be highly productive and efficient? Because again, after all, we've been through this play before, right? I mean, when computers came out, Apple came out with HyperCard. HyperCard was this brilliant tool to enable, educators and anyone else who wanted to author educational material and distribute it, via all the tools that Apple made available, and for distributing educational materials. At the end of the day, it's really, really, really hard to develop any sort of comprehensive instructional material that's really going to make a dent for an individual, sort of using an authoring tool.
Well, just connecting people is going to be transformational. So far, we look in the developing world. Until about 5 years ago, people didn't have cell phones. When villagers went to cities to work, they were cut off from their families. The kids, in fact, even in Western society, The only source of knowledge that children had was what they learned from their parents, what they learned from their teachers, what they learned from their preachers, and therefore they were always brainwashed, that they were secluded, that they were marginalized. Now, over the last 10 years, you've gone from 0 cell phones in countries like India and China to 1 billion. There are almost more cell phones than people already in these countries. And connectivity has transformed societies. The fact that you have uprisings happening in China, the fact that you have people rebelling against corruption in India is because they're connected to each other just by telephones right now.
So I
Wait
totally believe
wait till
in
the same
connectivity,
thing happens,
right?
But wait till the same thing happens with knowledge. That on internet-connected devices, you have more knowledge available than existed, than scientists had 15 years ago, than physicians had.
You can't even put a drop in the ocean by developing dedicated apps around knowledge.
Forget about it. Start with social media. Start with the ability to search. Start with the ability to have encyclopedias of knowledge available to the kids that need them, to the people that need them.
I have a background in education. I actually am from New York State, and I was one of the first ones in the 90s to be recruited by Apple to teach people in special education how to integrate what we called CAI, computer-assisted instruction, at the time. This was way before the app revolution. This was way before smartphones. I basically started using an Apple Performa when I was doing special education as a teacher, and then I became a speech therapist. And I think the future of education is definitely in mobile technology, because it gives common language between underdeveloped countries and developed countries who some have better infrastructure, some do not have infrastructure. Mobile technology can conquer that. What they cannot conquer is the need to have a quality relationship between curriculum control and app development.
In the developing world, you don't have teachers. Where are you going to get curriculum from? Where are you going to get
That's the problem. You don't have
But
teachers.
we have leveled the playing field.
We're talking about the United States, where we beat up our teachers, we depend on curriculum. You go down to India, you go down to Africa, you don't have any of that. You have nothing there. So at least you can connect people up. So that
But if we can create apps like I created my socially speaking
they'll
app,
create it themselves. We're not going to create apps for the developing world here.
I
We're
understand.
going to create apps for the rich kids in Silicon Valley. The developing world is going to create apps for itself.
actually I created the socially speaking app, which is being used in Africa.
Coming from Southeast Asia for this, I think I have two pieces. One, the king has guaranteed that everybody in Thailand will have a tablet, and they play with them. It's just a toy. And in Cambodia...
So you think it's a bad thing?
I don't think it's a bad thing. I think it's not introduced correctly because there aren't the schooling situations. There aren't the education. People don't learn to ask questions. They just want to be entertained. And even in Singapore, the issue is they don't ask questions. They want to receive. They don't want to engage. They're passive. And the task before them is to become engaged. And in Cambodia, the problem is they're too engaged in surviving. They do have cell phones, but it's for communication, and they can't afford them because the bills at the end of the month are so much. So they buy cards and they use, minuscule amounts of money. So that use it to access information. They don't know what to ask. For the last 2 generations, the older generation that's there now is teaching the younger generation, and none of them know anything because the people who knew were all eliminated. So I think the area of concern is how can technology help, but it isn't the answer.
So to continue on that, Bob, I have a question for you. Singapore has invested 20% of its budget into education. Can you tell us how that came about and the outcome of such a significant investment?
Well, there are two things. One, education is used to socially engineer the modern development of a very successful state, but it used the colonial model which replaced the British with the Chinese, who used the education system to create the state rather than to develop the state based on what the elites want. And they're recognizing, especially because of Lee Kuan Yew, who's fading as a leader, they're recognizing that the upside down pyramid, which is dependent upon the elite, needs some stability. And it doesn't have that stability because they're not innovative, they're not creative. The education system doesn't produce people who say, well, why? Why is it that way? Can I do that better? The very best of the best graduate from NUS. They get really good jobs, 150,000 a year, and they get their job and they sit at their desk and they go, okay. And they arrange their papers and pencils and they're waiting for somebody to tell them what to do.
So to continue on to that,
Sorry,
no, to bring
I
it back
just
to exactly what you're
rambled.
saying is, how does innovation and entrepreneurship, we believe it's a key driver in the economic development, can the skills of entrepreneurship be taught?
Well, my comment would come back to what Bill was saying. I think we've got a proliferation of tools, and we're funding entrepreneurs to make these innovations when there needs to be some innovation around how we fund inventors. I would bet Dave and Bill could tell you all kinds of stories. For every one entrepreneur they've funded, they've probably met over 100 inventors, right? People who don't know how to be entrepreneurs. There's a very different skill set there. So my input here would be, we need some new approaches to funding. So instead of funding a business, which is completely entrepreneurial, a completely different skill set, we need to look at how we might be able to fund inventors to seed innovation, which might be more in the lines of a royalty deal, a product investment that may get money out in the short term, but may not be built on some other type of funding model. That's one of the things I would see that needs to happen.
Yeah, so I'd love to hear Bill's thought on this. Bill, as an investor, which technologies around education do you think are the most exciting for the future of innovation in education?
Yeah, so I see technology, and I guess the background is partially useful. Just briefly, before I crossed over, as they say, to the dark side in venture capital, I was an entrepreneur. I spent most of my career as an entrepreneur, starting 4 different software companies. 2 of those 4 software companies were educational software companies. So the first was a company called The Learning Company, which I was involved not in starting it, but in restarting it. And that was focused on early childhood education. And then the second was a company called Academic Systems, which we started in the 90s to take advantage of networking and multimedia to deliver interactive multimedia instruction in mathematics to higher education. So I've had that experience of coping with sort of the intersection between technology and education in the US. So I don't have much that I really can offer in the developing world, but at least in terms of technologies that are interesting, I see technology as having sort of 3 elements or contributions in education. One is access. So technology provides this extraordinary access, and that's part of what Vivek is talking about, but that's just an extension of what's been going on for the last 600 years since Dante wrote in the vernacular and Gutenberg published, figured out the printing press. So access is not trivial, but just sort of distributing content is kind of uninteresting in the grand scheme of things. The second thing is engagement, is the ability to actually involve the learner with the learning material in a way that makes it in fact work. And we could talk about that. And then the third thing is analytics, which is sort of figuring out kind of how each learner is doing where they are and making sure that their educational experience is tailored to their individual situation right now. And that relates to, diagnostics and assessment and a whole bunch of other things that technology can do. And I think that last thing actually informs the engagement, and those 2 technologies in the intersection of engagement with diagnostics is where the big power is, I think, in the way that technology can enable. But just delivering content is not interesting.
So that brings me to the concept of curriculum. And Nina, if you want to talk about why it's important to design with empathy and put social skills into the curriculum, and then if Dave, if you'd like to speak about how you design it, your curriculum for the entrepreneurs who attended Kiritsu Academy.
Okay.
Yep.
I actually wanted to just add something to what Bill said. I think that I'm living proof that entrepreneurship can be taught to a certain extent. I am probably one of the only ones in the room who did not wake up years ago when I was in NYU and say, hey, I want to be an entrepreneur.
Me too. When I graduated from NYU, I had no intent of being an entrepreneur.
I think it's something that really boils down to two venues. The first being disruptive innovation. That can be taught. You hone your skills, you look for a gap in the market. Today, disruptive innovation is really not just a fancy word for technology. It really is a way that we can come together and problem solve some of the real issues that we have in developed countries and underdeveloped countries. The other byproduct of entrepreneurship that a lot of people don't really speak about is the thought leadership. And that's something that can't be taught. That's something that one hones and either has it and knows how to deliver it through social media or books or panels such as this, or they focus on the other aspect. So it's very important, I think, to make that distinction because the two types of entrepreneurship are starting to intersect. And that's why someone like me, who did not come from the entrepreneurship sector, who is a woman, is able to really synthesize the different elements with what we're calling now social entrepreneurship, which is honestly what we're all doing here tonight at this hackathon. So coming back to your question about designing a curriculum with empathy, I'm not quite sure that we need to design curriculums with empathy. What I do think we need to think about in terms of educational curriculums, whether we're using technology, whether we're using old school techniques, is to start incorporating social skills into a lot of curriculums in the world that have previously not really been looking at this. How many of you have seen the Huffington Post article with the French bullying ad where they have a bullying campaign in France? Do you know what I'm talking about? The Huffington Post ran the article a week ago. It's a really interesting parody of people at work, and they're playing that song, It's a Mad World, and they have people being bullied at work. And then at the end of this commercial, France talks about the big bullying problem that they're having. So I think at the end of the day, we can't have empathy, no matter what we do, if we still have such a problem with bullying, if we still have such a problem with social skills development across the world.
I actually want to take a second and talk about a technology that is using education and innovation. So, Jawalo, if you would kindly talk about Furkina and the work that you're doing.
Okay. Thank you. So, my name is Dwalu Kaisu. I'm a Boston-born Liberian, if you understand that, great. And my background's in computer science. A few years ago, I went home to Liberia to try and find ways to improve things after the war. And interestingly enough, my parents were fairly well connected in the school system, so I decided to teach, right? It was the easiest thing I could do to make a difference. In the process of teaching, it turns out a lot of the students, I gave a placement test, and a lot of them failed. So they didn't, in a postmortem, they say, we don't understand the context, we don't understand definition, very basic things that I thought, would be relevant or clear, they just didn't get, right? And I think there's language and culture and social lexicons there that are missing. So the first thing I did was try to buy 100,000, 200,000 dictionaries. I can tell you that story later. But the solution that worked was I saw a young lady texting her boyfriend doing a lecture, and I ended up building a text-based dictionary. Within a couple of days, within a week, they were using it at about 1,000 hits that week, 8,500 hits at the end of the month. People were actually very responsive to just having access to the information on their terms. Then I built an extension of that system where you can ask any question and give real-time answers, right? Science, math, physics, you name it. Fundamentally, what I saw was a lot of the students, their interest changed, their engagement changed, and at different levels. 2 of them now at University of Minnesota, by the way. So I saw a significant increase in their own productivity in academic work. I think the big part of this is really access, right? And not only the access, but really engagement. One of the reasons why building an app, I think, changes the engagement is it forces you to think differently. Everyone who's ever taken a computer science course or anything in reasoning and critical thinking, logic, mathematics, you think differently when you come out of that course. I was CTO for a startup, and I had everybody in the company take a programming, brown bag lunch. We do programming classes for everybody in the company. It forced them to go outside of their comfort zones and really engage in a very different way with the company and the product. So I think building the apps, it's not just delivering content. I think we need to move people into places where they're challenged, where they start to understand. There are limitations within word of mouth and how we're taught and teacher engagement, right? And I think technology is one of the ways to extend that, almost in a way where the user has now free room to play and go into places that no one else can control. It's almost an individual thing. Bill told me a story just earlier about his son getting exposed to Reddit and how it changed the dinner conversations. I think it's something that simple. And so I think we should all be pushing technology not as the panacea, but as a point of impact, as maybe one of the many catalysts that will force a different way of thinking.
Okay, so
Can I respond to that?
yes, please do.
In an advanced society like Singapore, to develop critical thinking, we're going to introduce a social media maybe, but it's a podcasting and an editing tool called WeVideo, and we're going to roll it out, but it's all based on, does it result in anything? So there's a lot of statistical analysis, and if it rolls out, because it's a controlled system, it goes from 200 to 6,000 to 60,000 to 150,000 students in a matter of a year, and they just do it. So it works if you have a program that is needed, as long as you have the reason for having the program.
Wonderful. Dave, you've designed the curriculum for entrepreneurs. Can you tell us about how you decided what should be in that curriculum?
So designing is probably a little overzealous. So what Dwalu? Yes. So what Dwalu said was he created an environment that fostered people's learning, didn't force it, but it gave them the opportunity to ask a question, what next? One of the things that we all banter about is information. We're in the information technology business, right? So, or many of us. So there isn't any reasonable consensus for what information is in the first place. So if I ask you, this whole room, what's information and how do you know when you have some? It would be lovely to get tweets or some emails and just see the variety of responses to those two questions. So what we did about the Academy was I went to the Walt Disney Museum in San Francisco. Amazing place. And what I discovered was that Walt Disney was relentlessly committed to creating an environment within which learning could naturally occur and excellence would emerge. So what we've done at the Academy is taken a very fairly soft stance on what I would call hard curriculum and ask the question and live out of the questions, what does an entrepreneur need to be able to communicate to build trust in an investor? And so that became the framework for everything that we speak about, not that we're teaching it, not that we're educating them, but there's a notion in education called inquiry-based learning. So asking questions and forcing the entrepreneurs to come up with answers that they can defend is exactly what we do. And the people who have been completing this program over the last year have consistently gone on to raise money at percentages that are way outside typical. Did that answer your question?
Absolutely, wonderful.
Okay.
Okay, so I have a question for you. As the VP of Innovation and Research at Singularity University, what are some of the initiatives that you're leading to impact education around the world?
There's nothing that we can lead, governments can lead, it's happening on its own. But my belief right now is that we've got to get the technology out there. and let communities solve their own problems. It's like with cell phones. Cell phones solved a lot of problems because people were connected. It started getting them to think differently, to work differently, to be more productive. Right now, the best we can do, because there are not millions of people, there are billions of people who are left out of the innovation economy. Just have to flatten the playing field by dropping technology prices, bringing them connectivity, and then let things happen at the local level. Every community is different. Robert talked about the difference between Cambodia and Singapore and different parts of Asia. Even Asia isn't consistent. You've got more problems in some countries than others. And the poorest countries have the biggest problems right now. It's not the rich, and I don't care about Singapore or even Thailand. They're rich countries, relatively speaking. It's Cambodia, it's parts of India, China, parts of China where you have mass poverty, where you have to now equalize. And Africa, in fact, all of Africa practically, other than South Africa, has serious problems, and people are completely left out. We have to give them the technology and let it equalize the playing field.
I'm so glad you said that. Also, I've been following your blog, and you have crowdsourced a book from 500 different women called Innovating Women. So this question is for everyone at the table. What role do you see women playing in the future of education and innovation?
Women are going to lead.
I've known everyone go for the mic.
Women are the teachers. Women are sensible. I mean, they're not the. I mean, look at what the boys in Silicon Valley is a boy-dominated society. I mean, a region. All they do is brain-dead social media apps, and then they have venture capitalists conspiring with them to come up with ridiculous valuations, so that the life gets sucked out of everything meaningful, because the boys are in charge over here.
Okay, and Bob?
In the developing world, they have to stop carrying the water. The water has to be delivered to them so that they have the time. Otherwise, it's lost. Once they can learn, they do it and pass it on to their children. But they're too busy surviving. Water.
I think that historically and biologically, yes, women have been in the fields of education. We've been in the fields of healthcare, myself included. I'm still in that arena, but I have crossed over into the entrepreneurship arena because we, women, do two things well: problem solving and collaboration. That's the future of education. That's the future of disruptive innovation. That's the future of entrepreneurship. That's why a lot of us are really starting to, as what does Sheryl Sandberg say, come to the table. A lot of us are really coming from unique backgrounds with definite educational and social entrepreneurship leanings, but the future of education is really going to depend on being able to collaborate and being able to problem solve. And that's a process. And that's a process that we have not developed sequentially. We have not really done it in order, and the people who've done it have been lucky, or it's been taught to them but not to others, such as the underdeveloped countries.
So in partial defense, last thing I'm going to be able to do is defend. Okay, well, I mean, so in partial defense of the culture of Silicon Valley, I broadly agree with Vivek's point, and I'm not going to defend, I'm not going to defend Twitter at all.
Or Instagram, or
right. There's a long list. I'll tell you though, because it happens that those of us at Garage Technology Ventures are very enlightened. So we have from day one had a deep insight into the importance of diversity in many dimensions, in terms of the different perspectives they bring. But so that the mantra I will tell you, which is which my partner Guy Kawasaki and I have both espoused from day one, coming from our backgrounds, is, and I'm just going to get in trouble for doing this, but I'm going to do it in any case. One of the critical reasons that I've learned over the years that it's really important to have a woman on the team is that for some mysterious reason I do not understand, but it happens to be true, and I can prove it with data. women have a better bullshit meter than men do. And there's something that happens, there's just something bizarre that happens when guys get together and they just lie to themselves, right? And, you know, you stick a woman in the middle of it and they kind of look at these guys and they say, are you kidding me? Are you like in junior high school or what? And so it's really, really, really valuable to have a woman in the room, you know, on the team saying, you know, bullshit. You know, that's not what the customer meant. You know, what the customer really meant was the app sucks. You know, you got to fix it. You know, it's not that they don't get it. It's that the app sucks, right? And that's, you know, so sometimes guys can do that. Sometimes guys can do it. And so I don't mean to put down guys, right? But broadly speaking, you know, as my wife will be the first to say, you know, men are generally full of shiitake mushrooms, and women are able to call it. And that's an incredibly powerful advantage if you can tap into it. And that's just kind of, that's always been our point of view on team building and entrepreneurial companies. And, you know, let's see if it makes a difference.
Well, Dave, did you want to? Okay. I just wanted to say I come from Liberia again, where there's a democratically elected woman doing an amazing job. And I am a mama's boy, so that affects my response, right? But I have seen, my mom raised 5 boys. All of them have graduate degrees. She pushes really hard. I mean, you know, no question about it. My dad was a Fulbright scholar. So there's a lot to the family history. But fundamentally, I think women are so close and integral to the family. The level of influence, I mean, look around you, right? Everyone here can say how much their mom's voice or reasoning influenced them. And well, all I will say is that every time I've thought about some of my biggest drivers, my dad made me work hard, but my mom gave me an emotional connection to everything I did. And that probably drove me crazy at times, but drove me to work at a different level than I did just because of the logic or because of the strength of my father. So when I look at Liberia now and I see all the things that women are doing, right, in the marketplace, women have changed the landscape in my home in a significant way. And, you know, I pray for the day when we get a woman president here.
Okay, wonderful, thank you. Speaking of a women's voice, what I've seen is that 90% of technology, that the world's problems are being solved with tech, and they're being solved with a group of 75% of men. So we're taking women's voice out of solving world's problems. So we need to kind of, as you mentioned, lean back into that and bring more women into the game of technology. Okay, so last but not least, Robert, are there instances, we're talking about gamification and education, so this is a really interesting topic these days and kind of thinking about the future of education. Can you tell us a little bit more about if there are incidents where gaming-based education is more effective than traditional teacher lecture models?
Well, first let me catch up with the conversation here. Back to one of the earlier points about technology coming to zero. Check out a company called Americhip, AMERICHIP. They're actually working with disposable technologies that have screens and limited lifetime batteries. So imagine implementing things on a disposable level. So we can go below zero. You can have the advertiser pay for the cost of things. Well, anyway, there's disposable technology. The other thing I'd like to point out is that watch for the assumptions that are happening here in the questions. When you ask if you can teach entrepreneurialism, if you can teach this, can you do that? You have to have a fundamental underlying assumption that you can teach anything to anybody, or anybody can learn anything. That might not be the case. Matter of fact, there's a number of different types of psychologies out there, cognitive profiles, even just some of the basic human resources philosophies, you know, built on the Myers-Briggs that identifies how people are actually different. We're talking about building teams. Well, why would you build a team if everybody's pretty much equal and can do any job and they're replaceable? So pay attention to that assumption, because that can lead you down some really strange paths where you think you could learn anything or the technology's there. So that's something that's happening here. I think you should take a look into. As for my expertise, back in 2002, co-founded a company to create the first STEM-based video game-based education, educational product. Basically wanted to make Halo, and make algebra missions for Halo type of a thing. We couldn't afford to build our platform on Halo or get those licenses. So we took an indie approach and created the first action-adventure series in a first-person, I'll say it, first-person shooter format, and a multiplayer network to teach algebra. And the question was, have I seen this? Basically, how have I seen this impact education? And I was a full-time substitute in New York City public schools teaching algebra. And how many people here have taught in a classroom? Okay. Anybody teach math by any chance? Okay. You probably know how horrendous and awful it is to teach math if you aren't this gifted teacher, if you don't have a handle on all those types of things. And I was teaching in New York City public schools, and the kids were coming in for the Bronx. Disadvantaged kids, under-resourced districts, the whole 9 yards. After that experience, where we brought this video game into that same demographic, this is not an exaggeration. As a teacher, I saw something that was nothing short of a miracle. I kid you not. I could not reach these kids in the classroom. I had so much trouble identifying. Now, I've worked with NFL teams. I've worked with the University of Michigan basketball team in their championship year of 1989. I had every story, every angle, everything I could bring to young boys in my classroom that I thought I could identify with, and I couldn't make algebra relevant to them as hard as I tried. Well, you put that screen in front of them where the opening sequence looks like an Xbox game. I mean, we were an indie developer, and we did a really good job. When you fly in a parachute, all of a sudden, these kids have completely forgotten that they're in the math class. And, I don't have the psychology and science behind it, but I can tell you that, when they normally walked into the math class, right, they were associating all these negative memories and associations with it because they've been socially promoted, told this is important. They've been failing all the tests, but somehow they passed. They believe this lie. Now I'm in the next grade and I'm under. They were having awful times. But all of a sudden they see this video game and their brain switches and associates a completely different set of positive memories, positive intentions towards this game. And it was amazing. And so I've seen that, and what I've seen from that is that my focus has been on the engagement, that you have to grab them. Now, beyond that, I've done more research on multiplayer games so that we can talk about much more advanced thinking. This is in for the developed world, really, but setting up really powerful multiplayer type games that create strategic thinking, higher order thinking, not just kind of textbook rote learning. But yes, I've seen some amazing transformations. And I have some videos if you want to see some on the site.
So thank you guys all for your participation. We're going to go ahead and move it to Q&A. We have live questions from the audience as well as Twitter. So if Aurora can join us.
Yeah. So I first want to point out, Rob, when you were saying that the students first came to the classroom, they had a negative association with math. Then you said they came in with a video game, they had a positive association. I don't know if you did this intentionally, but you touched different sides of your brain.
Yeah, I did that intentionally. I was just saying, it's so drastic.
Yeah.
I just had to assume the memories were on the other side of the brain.
Fair enough. So stay with me on this, but a monkey, a dolphin, a snake, and an elephant are all in the classroom, and the teacher says that the first person to climb to the top of the tree gets the A. And that's sort of an analogy to how the current education system works. So what you were talking about, Dave, I think I'll call it the Socratic method, but where the best way to teach is by asking questions and let people understand the own answers to their own questions. So the difficulty with teaching is how do you enable students to go after their own interests and ask their own questions while measuring them and having limited resources of one teacher to do that. And just posing that question on how technology could not only be used to give a set curriculum, but also to allow people to understand what their own curiosities are, and teachers could support them on that mission.
Does it need response, or
So there's amazing stuff that's going on in video recognition these days. And so out of that begins to create the possibility for being able to have automated reviews of both students and faculty in the classroom. This helps provide a framework for being able to provide assessments that help people figure out, how do I equip Dave, who's dumb as a rock, to be able to learn some new stuff? So by watching how I interact with the questions and comments going on from the faculty member, it's possible to begin to do some of that. Now that's very scary in the oversight kind of and privacy issues, but maybe that's the kind of thing that can be really helpful. But when you begin to empathize with what, I think Rob, right? So what Rob was talking about was that the thing that you built empathized, as I think the young lady down in the end, I can't see the, so how do we bring empathy in? Well, any of you who are actually successful entrepreneurs and building products that customers buy, the only reason that customers buy it is because they're getting some satisfaction out of it. Oftentimes you don't really know what it is, but if you don't do that, people aren't going to buy stuff. So ask the questions. What are the questions that a kid in Liberia is living out of, and how do you create ways to engage them, to help them believe that they can find the answers to them? Thanks.
I think you've touched on one of the problems that's about to, well, not about to, but will ultimately prove very difficult for our education system, because you were hinting at a customization of the experience. And
I'm sorry for interrupting you, but if you think how education used to be in smaller societies, it was like that. We used to have, remember, it was called apprenticeships, where people would find a master that had a trait that they thought was interesting and they'd follow him. Now we've got this base routine that we're trying to quantify. How the hell do you quantify empathy, for example?
I'll let somebody else answer that in a second. But if you're looking towards a customized experience, and in my experience, a customized experience means a content specialization. So I'm learning about railroads to learn about physics, or I'm learning about the NFL football game, about whatever it is. The problem we're going to have is if you're having a deep experience learning, let's say you're learning about math for the NFL. How many people here know what a cover 2 zone is? Okay, I saw a lot of hands raised earlier because you were teachers, but now if you have a student in your classroom learning math, totally loving football, because we all play fantasy football, don't we? Oh, we don't, but your students love it. That's just one example of a place of curriculum the teacher won't know how to help the student, right? That's just one. That's NFL. What about the railroads we were talking about? I want to explore railroads. What about SimCity? If you're creating a complex experience and you have different content domains, the teacher will not be able to even be the guide on the side. And this is a problem that ultimately we're going to have to handle if we do have a proliferation of these types of products. If somebody wants to answer the empathy question.
Does anyone else in the audience have a question? Okay, Mr. David Throb.
I was looking at you. I'm the one that made the bizarre trip with my computer line. But Bill, I was looking at your bio because I went to school with Bill Riker many years ago. It's not you. Unless you went to Annapolis. But one of the things you said is that you look for people that are not driven just by ROI. They're driven by something much greater. And I really respected that. And I have 2 questions, and this leads to the first one. The biggest problem in the video game industry today, in a world where 7,000 game apps are being produced every day and put into the market, is discoverability. So we're sitting here talking about catalyzing, the delivery of an immense body of intellectual property and value to, I don't know, maybe 2 billion people that have cell phones that need this educational scaffolding that don't have it right now. How the heck do they find it? It's the same problem with video games. It's the same problem with a lot of other things. But that discoverability needs to somehow be contextualized in this overarching value. And then the second question, the oppositional question to this, is how do we incentivize entrepreneurs to build this content? What's the darn business model, for people that may be living on $2 a day? And how do you address those two issues? Because those two issues, if resolved, will end up in a solution that can foster the drive that these people all have far more deeply than anybody in this room to acquire the skills and the capacity to make their lives better for their families. They do all want to do something, but as Bob was saying from Singapore, they're not even trained to look for it. They don't know what to ask. If you don't know the right questions, you won't get the right knowledge. So business model for entrepreneurs, creating content, and discoverability in the context of some kind of curricular context that can actually give them what they need to better their lives.
Yeah, thank you. There's a lot there, but first, in terms of your point about discoverability is there's no question that there needs to be a process of curation, somewhere in the system, and there are a bunch of different ways to curate the highest quality material. And we've had the same problem in education forever and ever and ever. There's always been this massive proliferation of lesson plans around any given topic in education, at the K-12 level, and a massive proliferation of articles and textbooks, et cetera, at the higher ed level. And there is a curation process that happens various levels to various degrees of quality. I think you'll see the same thing happening in education apps. So unfortunately, what it means is there will be some gems that are missed, right? There'll be some gems that don't get discovered, that don't bubble up, that will be missed. But I do think there are enough people who are deeply engaged in finding quality material that they will pull together libraries of apps or content or whatever it is for their target audience. Now, in terms of creating, what's the incentive to create? I think the reality is that you will find clearly there are lots and lots and lots of people who are motivated to create quality apps, for want of a better phrase. And I think you will find there are enough people who circulate through the developed world education system and the developing world education system that have the ability to think across the systems, who can tap into what they've learned in the developed world and develop and tap into what they've learned in the developing world, and they will create apps, because it's easy to create apps and people love the creation process and they want to create something most likely for a specific situation, a school or a university or a place where they have been or where they are. And so there will be plenty of creation, and I, in spite of my pushback to Vivek, I think there will be more and more tools available to enable people to create high-quality instructional apps around lots and lots and lots of topics that'll include, a railroad version and an NFL version and a cricket version, right? For any given content. And then people will curate around, exposing the best of them to their target world.
So, yes. Yes. So it's interesting. That draws a parallel to something I've been playing with. So as a hiring manager, one of the things I do when an engineer comes in is I pick a place based on their resume or some expertise, and we talk about that a little bit, right? And I either go left or right depending on how well they answer, right? So that starts to inform how the depth of their knowledge and how deeply they can go. I started to do the same thing in Liberia, and honestly, I'm playing with it now in Oakland with Common Core stuff. But essentially using text, so based on the level of the questions you're asking me, I'd say the veracity of knowledge that I can infer based on either your verbiage, diction, etc., I extrapolate, and it requires a good bit of data for machine learning, but I build a baseline. I say, okay, for example, you're here at Common Core 8 or 9, And then over time, I track either your progress, and then we try to see if we can make inferences on either suggestions for where you need to go or areas of strengths and weaknesses. So it's actually something I'm in the process of figuring out now. And naturally over text, right, there's a lot of errors. Well, in any system, right, there's a good bit of error. But I found some very good traction and very good information in Liberia where the students were actually very responsive to, so you didn't know the area under curve and integration or matrix algebra, and I could push you to go that way based on my interaction back with you, right, over text. All is over text. And so the business model for me at that point was really, I would then use it to build out some behavioral data. I would use it to build out some advertising. I can extrapolate then things about, honestly, we did things to extrapolate gender and roughly age and demographics and tribal and social cultural learnings where we could then target, or we tried to target, and make that data available to some of the publishers and other businesses. So I think that model is still viable here, and certainly in a much larger way because there's so much more data available.
I'd kind of like to disagree here really quickly. I don't think every business